my sewing journey basically started when I was about you guys' age. I really would love to share this journey with you guys because I'm extremely passionate about sewing. So I basically, my dad owned a denim factory back in the 80s, and he ended up moving it into our garage. I've always been a super anxious kid, and I really wanted to spend time with my dad. So I decided to basically go into the garage and ask him, hey, can I help you? Can I cut elastic? Can I cut fabric? What can I help do for you? And my dad would, allow for me to cut a fabric, cut elastic, all that kind of stuff. And at the time, I was learning how to mass produce, how to cut 15 jackets all at one time, as opposed to cutting one jacket in one jacket. And spending time with my dad, there would be moments where he didn't have things for me to do. So I would go in there, I would start sweeping up the floor, and I would find these pieces of fabric that would be on the floor, and I would ask him, hey, is this something that you want, or is this trash? And he would say, these pieces are trash. And I ended up picking up these pieces of fabric, and at the time I still had a doll, and this doll was, not that I would play with this doll, but it's I really wanted to create something for this doll because the doll was nude, and I just really wanted to create something for this doll. I wanted to see if I could challenge myself to create something for it. So I ended up, just kind of putting fabric over the doll and stitching it and doing all that kind of stuff with my hand, and my mom started to notice that I was really into it. And my mom actually went to school for, pattern making and sewing and all that kind of stuff. And she sat me down and she was like, hey, let me show you how to create this sewing pattern that you could use all the time to create something really cool for this doll. So I ended up, sitting down. My mom was explaining to me, you measure from here to there to this to this. And I ended up with this physical pattern, basically a blueprint of how to create a jacket for this doll. And this doll that I had ended up having so many different jackets that I would make for it, and they were all specifically made for this doll because we created this pattern for her. And I just remember feeling so addicted to creating these jackets for this doll, because it's I would sit down, and then at the end of sitting there, I would have this physical item of something that I had actually made, and the doll was wearing it. The doll looked really cool with it, and I kind of got really addicted to the sewing part of creating something out of nothing. And I felt that really kind of sparked more of an interest in me wanting to continue to sew, me wanting to be well, if I could do that, what else could I do, and as I started to get a little bit older, my dad was allowing for me to go into the sewing studio. And he had asked me when I was about 15, he was what would you like for your quinceañera? And I didn't have a traditional quinceañera. I just had a birthday party, and I requested an industrial sewing machine, and I said I would love to have an industrial sewing machine. And he was really hesitant about it because he just didn't want for this big sewing machine to sit in a room. He wanted to make sure that if I did want something, that I was going to utilize it on an everyday basis. And to his surprise, I used it on an everyday basis, so much that he would come and knock on my door and say, all right, you have to turn it off, it's loud, and we all have to go to bed, But I remember, going to thrift stores because, we were poor. My mom had 6 kids, and, my mom had this love for thrifting, and we would go into the thrift store and we would, find all these really cool pants, and I was turning them into a skirt and having this really unique style, and being able to see the potential in what clothes you know, what someone's like trash would become into something that I really turned into something really cool, like having like this really unique style and all that kind of stuff, like utilizing all these things that were already made. And I really enjoyed the rework of it, like cutting it, utilizing like this really cool fabric, and really being on a budget really like forced me to be like extremely creative and like creating things that were going to be one of a kind, you know. And I started reworking a lot of things, and I really became extremely even more addicted to sewing. And I was like, oh my god, I love sewing so much. What else could I do with sewing, you know? So I ended up, you know, I had found this really cool tote bag. It was just like a really simple tote bag. It was like, you know, canvas tote bag, and I think it had like some kind of wording on it. And I was like, well, I can't relate to this wording, so it's like, how could I cover this tote bag to where it's like I could still utilize the structure of it, but like, you know, create something that would basically like show like my style and who I am, you know. And I ended up recutting like this tote bag and rebuilding the tote bag, and I was so like, that was like my first start to finish project that I had ever done with like a sewing machine, that it really like just fueled like my passion for it even more. I was like, oh my god, I could make tote bags. I could make these tote bags, and I could, you know, I could just produce them, and you know, I'm having like such a good time with them. And so at the time I was working as a medical records person at, you know, this private hospital, and I made sure that every single day that I was going into my job, every day that I was coming out of my job, that I made sure that every single day I made 2 tote bags. And I really set this goal for myself because I was born and raised in LA, and there was just so many distractions for me. Like, all my friends wanted to go out, you know, I was dating at the time, and you know, I had a lot of distractions. Like, a lot of people really wanted to take up a lot of my time, and I just really wanted to make sure that if I was going to work for someone, that at the end of the day I was going to make sure that I worked for myself, that I was building something so I could have something. So every day I would make like these 2 tote bags, and I would make them, and at the end of the week I would have 10 tote bags. And so the stack would just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and I would end up selling them at like, you know, like art shows and like, you know, events and all that kind of stuff. And it really fueled like that fire to like continue to keep going, because it's like I was creating things, and they were these things, these physical things were giving me a lot of like self-worth. Like, it was allowing for me to basically have like this passion and like this burning like feeling inside of me of like, wow, like I didn't go to college, I didn't go to fashion school, but it's like I'm creating like these really cool things, and I'm being respected as an artist, and being respected as like someone that, you know, is designing and making their own stuff and selling it, you know. And I finally, you know, decided that, you know, I wanted to move to San Diego. I was gonna follow like my husband at the time, my boyfriend at the time, which ended up being my husband, and I wanted to come to San Diego. And I thought, you know what, if I need to get a job, I'll get a job, but if anything, like I could just sew, you know, and I could just make stuff and sell it at events and do all that kind of stuff. And I ended up moving to San Diego, opened up my sewing studio, and at the time I was basically offering custom sewing and tailoring. And I felt that during those years, there was about 7 years that I just spent basically perfecting my skill and sewing and tailoring and figuring out sizing and figuring out like what are everyone's biggest complaints about clothes. Like, why do people not like clothes that much? Why do people like clothes? Why do people want to wear specific kind of clothes? Like, this was like a moment in time where it's like I really became like an actual student of like a live, you know, like fashion school. like actually hearing people's thoughts, people's, you know, how they felt about clothes, how clothes made them feel, and how I didn't want my clothes to make people feel, you know. And you know, obviously the pandemic affected a lot of people, and like it affected so many people. It also affected me, you know, and I decided that I wasn't going to allow for this moment in time to basically to ruin my business. You know, there was a lot of time where I was like, oh my god, like this could really impact my business, where it's like my business, like it shouldn't have survived something like that, you know, because it's like I was just doing custom sewing and tailoring and no one was going anywhere. So it's like I transitioned my whole entire business into creating my own personal designs, and basically like allowing myself to really think about the things that really mattered to me at the time, and mattered to me not at just in that moment in time, but things that really mattered to me overall. And that's being able to be happy, you know. And I feel like for a really long period of time, like I wasn't being my genuine self and being able to create things that really fueled like my passion, or that made my soul feel whole, or that made me feel good inside. And I really wanted to just, you know, during like when everyone was like locked down and everything, like I enjoyed those moments of solitude, to like sit there and to actually think, this moment right now is the moment that I have to be able to like create whatever I want to create. And I documented like this whole process of like, all right, I'm gonna do this is what I'm gonna do, and we'll see what happens, you know. And I feel like, you know, my whole transition into like starting my own clothing brand was really like one of the main things that I really wanted to make sure that I wasn't creating even more waste than there already is. Like the fashion industry is the number 2 pollutant of just trash, and I really wanted to make sure that if we were going to start a clothing brand, that we weren't going to add to that, you know. And it's like my whole thing is I've been reworking clothes since, you know, for over 20 years, you know. Like I've really loved reworking and being able to see the potential in clothes that's already made and making it into something special that no one will ever have, you know, and making it affordable for people to be able to purchase these things, you know. Because it's like one items are obviously like they take time, and they, you know, they take a lot of effort, and, you know, design goes into it, and they're more expensive. But reworked one things, there's already a foundation there, and you're able to like see like how this piece of clothes could turn into something else, you know. And I think that there's something beautiful about those kind of things, of like being able to see the potential in something that's already made that could turn into something that people will want, you know. And I feel like my sewing journey is definitely something where it's like I've really have never imagined being able to be in the positions that I have been in my whole entire life, because it's like I've been able to be a part of so many great things, all because I have this amazing skill that a lot of people take for granted, you know. I feel that sewing is definitely one of those skills where it's like we're all wearing clothes, so it's like, why are we not valuing sewing as something more than just, you know, someone at a sewing machine? Why aren't we valuing it? Why aren't we you know, seeing it as something like, wow, this is like such a beautiful piece of art, you know? Why aren't people sewing anymore? And it's like, and I want to keep sewing alive. I want to continue to you know, to encourage people to fall in love with sewing, because sewing isn't just about creating things, it's about